boys and girls. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the government system of ancient Rome. We will be looking at the way that Rome obtained all of its power, and we will also be looking at how Julius Caesar came to rule the Roman Empire, what he did during his time as the ruler of the Roman Empire, and what some of the good and potentially bad things that he did while he was in charge. It's important that we understand this historical context of what was going on at the time prior to reading William Shakespeare's um, Julius Caesar. So let's start off with kind of where we are going to be talking about specifically. Our major point of focus is in Italy and the capital of Italy, which is Rome. You'll notice that Italy itself is a peninsula that goes into the Mediterranean Sea. And so later on, we'll take a look at kind of the expanded Roman Empire, but just for right now, I want you to really take a look at where exactly Rome is situated, and then also where Italy is situated in comparison to the continents that surround it. So let's first look at the founding of Rome. Historians believe that Rome was founded between the years of 758 and 728 BC. It is said that Rome was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, but this is a legend, and as we know, legends are not always, or are actually always made up of both fact as well as a lot of fiction. So the legend says that these two orphan boys, Romulus and Remus, were found by a wolf and were cared for by this wolf. After raising the boys, or after the boys were raised, the wolf sort of gave the boys away to a shepherd who finds the two boys at a young age. So the boys, as they grow older and older, they decide that they want to sort of found their own city. So they have a disagreement about the exact location of where that city should be. One brother, Remus, thinks it should be in one area, whereas Romulus thinks it should be in another area. Well, Romulus decides that he doesn't want to have to disagree with his brother, so he decides to kill him. So Romulus decides to form his own city and found his own city, which he actually names after himself. He names it Rome. So that is kind of the story of, or the legend of how Rome was founded. What we do know as fact, however, was that after the city of Rome was founded, there was a group of people who took power in that area called the Etruscans. The Etruscans took power in Rome around 600 BC. That's about 60 years after Romulus is said to have founded Rome. So, during the time of Romulus, when he was said to have been in charge, or when he was said to have founded Rome, there were Roman citizens who lived there. It wasn't like Romulus just decided to stake his claim on Rome and he was the only one there. There were plenty of people living there. So when the Etruscans moved in about 60 years, theoretically 60 years later, the Romans were still living there. But it was this group called the Etruscans who had taken the power there. Historians aren't sure where they came from, where the Etruscans came from, based on the fact that they don't know what specific language they spoke. We know that they were not speaking Latin, they were not speaking Italian, and they were not speaking Spanish. So they also weren't speaking Greek. So it is very much sort of mysterious as to where they were, where they came from, and who they were. The Etruscans set up a king as sort of the leader of the world in Rome, and that king, as always, had all of the power. So in 509 BC, it said that the Romans revolted and drove the Etruscans from power. They decided that they never wanted to have an all-ruling king again. So even though the Romans did drive out the king and drove out the Etruscans, Romans did adopt some of the sort of cultural ideas that the Etruscans had. For example, in this fresco, you can see the men are wearing togas, which is a in high fashion of the Romans, and also sandals, which is another sort of fashion staple that the Romans took on from the Etruscans. So after the Romans decide that they don't want to have an all-ruling king again, the Romans decide that they want to make their government a republic. And a republic is a form of government where the power is held by the people and their elected representatives. Usually, republics have an elected or nominated president rather than a monarch, meaning a king. Republics sound very similar to what we're familiar with democracies. Um, in republics, citizens have the right to vote on their leaders, and the leaders based on what the wants are of the citizens. So it is always sort of the citizens driving the decisions that are made. So let's take a look briefly at sort of the breakdown in power in a republic, and specifically in the Roman Republic. So first, we're going to start off with the Senate. And the Senate is made up of 300 upper-class men called patricians, okay? Patricians had the most power, okay? Mostly because there was so many of them. They also were very smart men, and they really were the ones who were driving a lot of the ideas about how to improve the situation, the government, the social, a lot of the situations that were going on in Rome. They really were the brainstorming team to create change. They, like I said, have the most power in the Roman government. Then we have the two consuls. The two consuls are two individual men who ran the government. The reason that the consuls have less power than the Senate is because they are the ones who took advice of the Senate. So the Senate would come to the consuls who would say, listen, consuls, here's what we should be doing. Here's what should go down. Okay. To which the consuls would, say, yes, we agree, or no, we don't agree. Oftentimes, the consuls did exactly what the Senate wanted. Okay. So that's why the Senate had more theoretical power than the consuls. The consuls would take advice from the judgment of the Senate based on foreign affairs, based on lawmaking, also finances and budgetary issues. They ruled for only 1 year only, and the power was evenly divided among the two, meaning that if any sort of political or government legislation came through, both would have to agree on any political action that was taken. So if one consul said, I just realized that this says consults and not consuls, so there you go, consuls. If one consul said, I'm vetoing this bill, or veto actually in Latin means I forbid it, the matter was dropped. So if they couldn't come to a decision on something, the matter was automatically sort of thrown off the table, and it would not move forward if there was not an agreement. Okay, we still use the term veto in our government. For example, if a president doesn't want to pass a bill, he will veto it. He will take it off the table, saying that he's not on board. We then have the plebeians, and the plebeians are sort of ordinary middle to lower class citizens who elected the government officials. They are the ones who theoretically, made requests to the consuls and the Senate. They were the ones who elected these officials into government. And as we go on, you'll see kind of how that plays out. Um, and then finally, there are slaves. So slaves, as you know, are workers without pay. They also do not have rights, and they typically lived and worked under unfair conditions. Finally, the one uh, sort of group or individual role that is not included in this graph is actually a dictator. And a dictator is, or was initially, um, was because, or was put in place because Romans feared the possibility of two consuls disagreeing on an emergency situation. So let's say that there was a really important issue where the government needed to come to a decision to pass a bill of some kind, or pass a law of some kind, or take an army decision to go do something somewhere. Okay, the consuls need to agree on that. If one says veto, it won't go forward. So, what the Romans did was that they put a law in place that stated that a dictator could be appointed to come in and handle an emergency. Okay, so when the consuls didn't agree, they would bring a dictator in. And a dictator was an official in ancient Rome who took office in a disagreement emergency. Okay? He had all the powers of a king, but could only hold office for 6 months. So in that emergency, all decision power would go to the dictator. So, under the Republic, the the Romans really expanded power all across Italy. Okay, and after 250 years of Rome being a republic, the Romans had almost complete control of Italy. Um, Believe it or not, this sort of power caused tension between patricians and upper class plebeians. Um, there was tension that was caused between the upper class patricians and the lower class or middle class plebeians. So the patricians thought of themselves as leaders and thought that they fought hard and worked really hard to keep control of the government. Plebeians, on the other hand, felt like they weren't being treated fairly and thought that they weren't given a voice, like they'd been promised by the Republic government. They also didn't always trust the patrician state. So what ended up happening was the patricians ended up forming sort of underground groups, rebellious groups, to protect their own interests. They wanted to protect their rights and make sure that they would not be sort of outpowered by the government that was in place. So we then have to ask ourselves, were the plebeians wrong to think that they were being treated unfairly? Absolutely not. The patricians' wealth increased because of Rome's growing success in taking over Italy. So as the wealth is increasing on the upper class side with the patricians, the plebeians are not really getting anything out of the deal. While the patricians were taking riches from those that they conquered, they would also buy land from small farms, would then turn them into huge farms, and then would have slaves work on those farms that put plebeians out of work. So all across Rome, there were many citizens that were left jobless. Eventually, the angry plebeians refused to fight in the Roman army and demanded that they be treated equally or fairly. So after all of this sort of tension and strife between them, the plebeians just said, enough is enough. We are no longer just going to sit back and watch you take all the riches, take all the land, and put us out of work. If you don't give us something, then we will not defend you in a military way. We will not fight for the Roman army. To which the patricians said, maybe that actually doesn't sound good. We need people to fight for our armies. So one demand to get the patricians to actually, sort of support the plebeians was that there be a written code of laws called the Laws of the 12 Tables, which applied equally to all citizens. The patricians went with it because they knew that they needed the plebeians to be part of the army and society. So after that request, that sort of agreement was made between them, things sort of improved between them. Whereas the plebeians agreed to fight in the Roman army, and the patricians basically said, "Okay, fine, we'll abide by these laws too. These are like all of our laws." Okay, um, so like I said, things improved, but the power was never really equal. Okay, um, so as this strife is going on, oh, and this is a picture of the location of where the laws of the 12 tables were originally inscribed. And obviously, this is a drawing of that same place. So, anyway, while the strife was going on, Roman armies fought bloody wars to conquer new territories that extended just beyond Italy. So, while all of the strife is happening in Rome itself, the Roman armies are expanding north, south, east, and west. Okay, so initially, the first map we looked at was just really looking at the Italian peninsula. Now, if you take a look, all the red here, that is all where the Romans have conquered and now have rule over. So we've now moved into almost all of Europe. Okay. We've moved into Northern Africa, Egypt, and also Asia. Okay. So this is a huge expansion that Rome is right in the center of. Okay. So by 120 BC, the Romans had so much control over so many areas, but the city of Rome itself was in trouble. Tension between the plebeians and the patricians rose again. Okay, so while we have tons of success here with the Roman Empire and the expansion of the Roman Empire, the city of Rome is struggling because of that tension between those two groups. So over the next 75 years, leaders from both plebeian class and patrician class formed private armies and fought the other group for power. So there were sort of rivalying groups going on to make sure that one had power over the other. Consuls no longer respected each other's veto power. And then finally, Rome was dissolving into a civil war with rebel and private armies roaming the streets and murdering their enemies. So all of these things are really just not good. Rome is really in a rough shape, or in a rough place. Rome needed a hero. They needed someone to come in and sort of take command and take control and give Rome sort of more of a solid and firm direction of where to go. So this is a statue of Julius Caesar, who was a Roman military leader. So Julius Caesar was a military leader who was out fighting and conquering land to expand the Roman Empire. So once again, as sort of Rome is crumbling, Julius Caesar is leading troops to expand the Roman Empire to get them more power. So he led the Roman army from 58 BC to 51 BC. He captured huge amounts of gold and killed, enslaved, and uprooted millions of citizens from those conquered areas. Yes, that sounds horrible, but at the time that was considered to be a major success to be able to do that. And then his troops recognized his leadership abilities and military tact, which made the troops support and respect him. So he had almost like an immediate fan base based on the success that or his military skill and military leadership. The problem was that Caesar was power hungry. He enjoyed being in charge and enjoyed being able to make decisions for a large group. And obviously, he was pretty good at it. So he, I think, was probably a little bit arrogant. So it showed his power hunger sort of showed when he returned back to Rome in 49 BC. So once the Roman armies were done expanding, he and the army returns to Rome, which, as we mentioned, is at the time crashing and burning. Not literally, but, with murders in the alleyways, killing each other and fighting each other, Rome is really in a tough spot. So, he returns to Rome in 49 BC. He actually he decides, you know what, Rome really needs someone to be in charge, so I'm going to jump in on this sort of civil war that's going on and see what I can do. Because of all of the loyal troops that he had when he was out conquering the land to expand the Roman Empire, he and his troops actually were able to take power in Rome. So they defeat the Senate, they defeat all those rebel groups that were going on at the time, and they take power in Rome. He becomes the dictator of the Roman Empire in 48 BC. Remember, he can theoretically only be a dictator for 6 months because in an emergent situation, that is what is allowed from a dictator. So he initially comes on as a dictator in 48 BC. In 45 BC, he declares himself the only consul of Rome, okay, whereas before he came here, obviously we know that there were two. And then finally, just 1 year later, Caesar decides that he's going to be the dictator for life. Okay. So also keep in mind, guys, too, that yes, he says that he's the first the dictator of Roman Empire. He is then the consul of Rome, and then finally a dictator for life. Keep in mind, this is not just about being in charge of Rome. This is about being in charge of the Roman Empire, which is that huge expansion of land that goes into all of those other countries. So it's not just one city; it's an entire area. Plus, the Mediterranean Sea was the sort of centralized way for all of those areas to communicate. So the Roman Empire is huge at this point. Sorry. So, when he went ahead and declared himself dictator for life, he became king in all but the name. Okay? He stamped his name and face on coins as the currency. He had statues of himself put up all over Rome, and he, like I said, had all of the power. So, did Caesar's hunger for power make him a bad leader? No, he really did take a lot of steps to reorganize the government to put Rome back together. There were a ton of social and economic reforms that he made to improve Rome specifically. So, he started infrastructure projects, like building roads and buildings. He hosted gladiator games and let the poor in for free so that they could enjoy the entertainment. He halted extensive use of slavery in rural areas, which made more sort of lower class citizens available to work. He established Roman colonies. He appointed new governors in the provinces that had been sort of in those areas that had been taken over. He establishes new governments there. He reduced taxes and made tax collections more fair. And then finally, he allowed people of conquered lands to become Roman citizens. Granted, those people were, or the people of those areas were taken over by force, but nonetheless, at least he was now saying, okay, well, we overtook you, but now you can at least be part of our government and part of our government system. All citizens were subject to Roman law and owed their loyalty to the emperor, which at the time was Caesar, and they could participate in the central governments of Rome or in their local governments. So, although he did a lot of really good things with social and economic reforms, he made some really poor decisions as far as his politics goes. So, when Caesar sort of came to power, he had senators. Okay, he still had that sort of big group of senators that he wanted to use as almost like his advisory team. The problem is that He replaced some senators whom he didn't like with senators of his own choosing. So that is obviously bad and not ethical and makes people not really have trust in him because it makes him look like he's just out for his own interests. Um, he also, for those people who were removed from the Senate, he didn't remove their power. So when those senators were removed from power, were removed from the Senate, they were very angry at that decision, and they were angry about being unfairly removed from the Senate. However, Caesar didn't, exile them. He didn't say that you're part of the plebeian class. He basically just said, all right, you guys just aren't senators anymore, which I don't think was a very good move. Um, Many of the replaced senators felt like Caesar was acting like a king and despised that idea. So they were sort of onto the fact that he was definitely very, very power hungry. Obviously, again, this is kind of all just sort of bad politics. It made the Senate members the ones who had, like I said in the beginning, the most power. There were many people in the Senate that were unhappy with Caesar. So while a lot of maybe the citizens of Rome may have really liked Caesar for the good things that he did, the Senate was not happy with him. So what did the Senate do? So the end of Caesar, and this is a spoiler alert, the senators who were angry with him, they plotted against him and murdered him. They stabbed him in the Senate, okay? And that was the end of Caesar. So after he died, members of the Senate and people of Rome were divided. Some people felt like they were devastated to lose him as a leader and as a ruler, whereas other people felt that he was a tyrant. So, hopefully at this point you have sort of a crash course in Roman government and an overview of what Caesar did and how he came to power and what he did while he was in power. And once again, the point of this was so that we could have a little bit of a historical context as we go ahead and read the play Julius Caesar. So please make sure you jot down all of your notes in your writer's notebook or you type them on a Word document and make sure you bring them to class tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to look back into it to make sure you're able to write down anything and everything that you feel like is an important detail or important facts. All right, everybody, see you tomorrow.